Very excited tonight about tonight's guest. If you want take your seats. So if you ever wondered how you can put together a portfolio, ever wondered how you can still scale and still work a W-2 at the same time, well, this is the night tonight to listen to a phenomenal story. Ricky's been coming faithfully to the meetups for a little bit over a year now, and it seems like every week is a closing that he's closing on a property. And tonight we want to talk about insurance and how that's impacting your portfolio and everybody else's, and really just a story of how you jumped in at one point, kind of took a break, and then came back and just hit the gas and started scaling up that portfolio even further. So I want to put your hands together tonight for our guests.
Thank you, Emile.
So how did you even get started in a real estate business?
I guess the way I got started, I always had an interest in real estate, and in the late 90s, I had a friend that had a rental property that was in distress, and it's in Metairie. He offered, was just driving by one day and saw him out in front of it, and I stopped, talked to him just to tell him hello, and he asked me the question, you interested in buying this property? And I actually still own that property today. Anyway, it's in the Westgate area. I said, well, what you want for it? He said, I'll sell it to you for $25,000. So.
What year was that?
That was, I believe, in 1996. Anyway, so I bought that property. Had to put about $25,000 into it to renovate it. And at the time, so I had $50,000 in it. I started renting that house for $500 a month. That same house rents today for $1,600 a month. It's a 4-bedroom, about 1,400 square feet. So at that time, I just graduated college. My goal was to acquire one property per year. And so I started with that goal in mind and started acquiring properties. And I got up to 10 houses. And then in 2000, I got married and started having children, had four kids, 3 sons and a daughter, about 18 months apart. And so real estate kind of was put on hold while we're raising kids. I was occupied with working, playing football, actually coaching my kids in various sports as well as scouts, et cetera. But anyway, so then fast forward to 2021, Hurricane Ida hits, and at the time I had 9 properties, so I managed those, and had a particular property that a tree went through the center of it and had a major claim, and so I rehabbed that property. And post Ida, I bought one house in October, one in November, and one in December of that year. And it was in that year that I came to my first meetup on the Westbank here, and Stephen Leonard was actually the speaker at that meeting and had an interest. Me and my son came to that meeting and had an interest in starting to expand on the Westbank. And so following that meeting, I started looking for properties. Actually found a 12-plex here in Gretna that was on an MLS for $1 million. And so I put an offer on that property. And just to give you some figures, I offered $800,000 for the property, got it under contract, and due to the depressed rents, that particular property appraised at $595. So I almost lost the deal, and went back to the table with the owner and offered him. I said, I'll tell you what, the bank's only going to lend me $595, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you an extra $5,000 on top of what the property appraised for. And so I acquired that property for $600. That same property today, 2 years later, it's stabilized, and average rents are about $1,050. And then following actually buying that property, I had my insurance agent came to me and said, hey, I got a client that wants to sell an 8-plex in Gretna, not too far from your place on O'Connor. And I said, well, I'm interested. So I used that purchase to negotiate the price of this eightplex. I went to the owner, I said, what y'all want for it? And, they gave me a price, and I said, well, the average, I just bought a 12-plex, the average per unit, I'm willing to give you that for the same average per unit for this eightplex. They said, well, we got two ones, and it's got 6 two bedrooms. So, they negotiated up a little bit, but I was able to buy that eightplex at a real good price as well. So, and that was in like April of 22. I purchased a 12-plex, and then I purchased the 8-plex in June of 22. So from that November meetup, when I came here with interest, within 6 months, I had 20 doors on the Westbank. And so I didn't stop there. I kept leveraging some of the properties I had and continue to buy properties on the Westbank and kind of balance. My goal was to balance my portfolio. And so today I own several properties in West Wego, several properties in Avondale, and I'm a type guy that I don't mind sweating. So, you might see me at the dump emptying a trailer. I do a lot of sweat equity. I believe in sweat equity. In the properties, people say, I tell people I buy properties 50 cents on a dollar, 70 cents on a dollar. But a lot of that's through sweat equity. I frequent Home Depots. I got a good crew. I got a couple of people that have been with me over the years that do sheetrock work, repairs. I got a couple of electricians, a couple of HVAC guys. But, I'm not scared of picking up a paintbrush or doing demo, doing different things just to make the numbers work. And, it's kind of what I do, and that's kind of how I got started and continue today.
Yeah. Before we go back a little bit, I wanted to, so strategically, how did you leverage that 12-plex in the purchase for that 8-plex? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically the way I acquired the 12-plex is I opened a credit line with a local bank here in New Orleans and leveraged some houses, equity I had in 4 houses. So that credit line today, I still have it, basically has 4 of my properties that I purchased in the early 2000s. That first house we talked about that I paid $25,000 for, I was all in at 50. That same house appraised for this credit line at $250. So I used some of the equity I had in some of my properties that I bought early on to set up my credit line. So I purchased the 12-plex with my credit line. As a down payment, I had to put 20% down. And then as far as after I acquired that property, with the same bank, I leveraged the appraisal for a couple of other properties and bought basically took out another loan, took the equity out of 2 houses to buy the 8-plex.
Yep. And you when you say pulling these equities out and lines of credit, what type of financing are you using for these? Are these community banks? Are these just mortgage brokers, lenders? Who's the best person to approach with it?
Local banks. So the credit line is with Hibernia Bank. People say, well, Hibernia went out of business. No, they're still in business. Hibernia came back. So I use Hibernia Bank. Also have a relationship with B1 Bank. And, that's but I acquired the 12-plex and the 8-plex through my credit line with Hibernia Bank.
Yep. So from that gap of time from the 90s with the 25,000 purchase, fast forward to the Westbank meetup in November, what kind of change for you?
Well, basically, Ida was a springboard. I had several properties. Of the 9 properties, 5 of those properties took damage from Hurricane Ida, everything from mainly roofing and structural. I had one house that, like I said, a tree went through the center of it and had a major claim on it. So that springboarded me to acquire some additional properties post-Ida. And then once I rehabbed those properties, that's how I established a credit line with Hibernia.
Mm-hmm. And you still do your investment, you still do all of your management, you still have a W-2. What's the reasoning behind that? Because it sounds like the portfolio is large enough to where you don't have to go to work. But is that a strategy? You just enjoy it? What's the thought process?
Big thing is it's twofold. From a risk tolerance standpoint with the local banks, they like seeing that W-2. Obviously, I may retire in 4 or 5 years. I could retire today if I wanted to, but I'm able to do both. I have a 22-year-old son that's involved with my business from the finance side we use Buildium, so he helps with some of the leasing and the financial side to make sure we're getting paid. And then I take care of the rehabs and working with the people that I work with as it relates to working on the properties. But the main reason is I'm not scared to say it, I'm a corporate executive for FedEx Freight, actually FedEx Services, but anyway, I've been with them 12 years. I've been in the logistics business for 30 plus years, but I'm able to do both. And the main thing is just having a solid team, and I'll get online and order supplies at Home Depot at night and have my crew pick it up during the day. So it's just doing things efficiently.
Yeah, that was my next question. So time management. So for the person that is kind of in that same position, financing is awesome because of the W-2, but they're kind of in that tight position where contractors may need more attention than necessary, or they don't have that team built quite yet. How are you able to manage time and still execute projects on budget and on time?
Yeah, that's a great question, and my son tells me I do too much of it. But 6 o'clock in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, I'll be on a job site, seeing what was done, seeing what's needed, and I try to stay 2 or 3 days ahead of the crew. When we're doing a rehab, I try to keep at minimum 2 to 3 days of material on a job, because that can definitely slow you down if you don't have materials on site. So, and I inspect, I pay my guys on a per day basis, and I go there in the morning, and then I go there in the evening to see what was done. If I'm in town, I travel a little bit with my job, but for the most part, if I'm in town, I'm checking on my projects on a daily basis, minimum once, but most of the time twice. And that's critical, because you got to hold people accountable, and you got to set expectations, and you got to manage that, because people will take advantage of you.
Yep. So this go around, since that November meeting, you're just getting back into it, so you're building your portfolio. How are you now recruiting new contractors and vetting those contractors to see who's going to make the team and who's going to get cut?
Yeah, I mean, it's, a lot of it's, I talk to people, network at these meetups, and, get referrals. I'm in the process of potentially switching my accounting, and, I ask the questions, what other investors, I ask a potential CPA, what other investors are you handling their books for? And I got a meeting in a couple of weeks, but mainly just, looking at what they've done in the past and talking to people, asking them the questions, and basically verifying validation. But it's not 100%, but I've been successful in basically kind of recruiting through word of mouth and vetting people out, because you can get taken advantage of. I have personally, and one of the things I stress, and I'm guilty of it, I was guilty of it this year, is never pay people too much in advance, because, number one, they might run off with your money, or number two, you don't want to give up the advantage. When you're doing a rehab, you want to hold back, and you don't want to ever get that, whether it's a painter or whether it's an electrician or anybody, a plumber, you never want to give them too much money for the project. You want to stay on an advantage side, because if they get in front of that, then they can go on to another job and come back to you, et cetera. So that's one of the critical things. And, I fired the HVAC guy last year just because, it's wintertime. Called him, hey, go change his heater out. And then he invoiced me after the job, and it was, double what I felt I should have paid. But guess what? I told the guy, I said, no problem. Here's your check, but just understand this is the last check you'll ever get from me. And I haven't used him since. And but that's one of the keys is just don't get multiple quotes. Anything over $4,000 or $5,000, always get 3 quotes, and never let that person that you're using get on the advantage side. You want to have the advantage as it relates to draws, et cetera.
Yeah, I heard you use the word holdback. How do you describe in your construction system for your properties holdback? So how much do you normally hold back before you pay out the entire balance that's comfortable for you? What's your number that you hold back from contractors to make sure they execute?
Yeah,
because those final 10% is like the worst part of the project.
I try to hold back as much as I can. From the standpoint, I'll give them a check every Friday based on production and what they got done, but there's no way nobody's going to get anything over a $5,000 check with me. I'll pay them in draws on a weekly basis, just to keep that advantage side, because I've been burned before.
And the punch list. So you wait until the punch list is all the way done?
Exactly. I mean, from a punch list standpoint, never give them that final check until you're satisfied and done several walkthroughs and checked all the boxes as far as, I'll hold back. I had a situation with, a guy held back until he completed every task, and he's called, I need my money. All right, get it done. Yeah, and because the key is keeping that advantage.
Yep. So from the 90s, you had a big gap where you just were managing those 10 properties.
Right.
What was management like? Because you still were working. You had 10 properties. What was management like then, and what is management? Because you self-manage, so what does management look like with that portfolio now?
I mean, back then I was driving around every month collecting rents, knocking on doors, collecting cash, whatever. If they weren't paying, picking up the phone, calling them. Now that, we have 44 doors, we switched about a year and a half ago to Buildium software. So we self-manage through Buildium, do all my leasing through Buildium, rent collections through Buildium. The tenant can either pay ACH or pay through the portal on Buildium, or they have the option they can go to Walgreens, Walmart, CVS, 7 different places and pay their rent. There's a pay near me sheet that we provide them. I laminate it and give them the option to pay us accordingly. And those rents come straight into our accounts.
What were some other softwares you kind of vetted, and what's the reason you chose Buildium?
I mean, my son really did that side of it and vetted the different things, but we did a couple of demos with Buildium, and for right at $200 a month, Buildium, you can manage up to 50 doors, so it's reasonable. And one of the things with self-managing in the past, we weren't real good at collecting late rents. So with Buildium, we have it set. If they don't pay about a fifth of the month, they get hit with a late fee, and it automatically is done through Buildium. And then it sends them 2 or 3 notices if they haven't paid. And then basically something else that we use is the task manager through Buildium. So if a tenant needs any tasks done, we try to make them, instead of picking up the phone and calling us, enter a task, and then we address it with our vendors that way.
That's good. Financing, what was the difference between the 90s all the way up to that November meeting? So what changed also? So I know you're using the credit line for the down payment. What about for the rest of the purchase? What does that system look like?
Yeah, it's just local banks. So I use cash flow. We've built the business up big enough where if we buy a property, we use our cash flow to do the rehab, and then we turn around, basically your BRRRR method. We refi, take that money, pay back the credit line, and move forward.
Yep. What's been the challenges with scaling up fast like that? So we right at, 24 months, and you went from 10 doors over almost 20 years, and now here we are at 44. So what's some of the bumps you're running into?
Yeah, the biggest thing is last year I acquired 7 single-family properties. Every one of them were major rehabs, and I'm in the process of finishing up the last 2 right now. And what that taught us is, I want to do 1 or 2 a year type major rehab projects. I want to focus more on multifamilies, but I want to do some of the smaller stuff. Utilities are on, needs a new kitchen, bathroom, where you can get out in 30, 45 days and get the property producing for you. I got a property in Meadow right now that I bought on a finance, so it's kind of been on the side because it's not, my note on it's like $500 a month. It's a 2,600 square foot house, major 3 baths, major rehab project, but I've actually bought several houses in between working on this project, and kind of that's the project we work on when we don't have any other work. But I think what this year has taught me, obviously with interest rates, I haven't purchased any property this year. I had 7 houses, major rehabs in my escrow, and we're working on our last 2, which we'll finish up 1 this week, and then the house I referenced that had 2,600 square feet, we'll finish out up. My goal is to finish it up by the end of the year. So that's really, next year as I move forward, I want to buy houses that power's on, utilities are on, no major plumbing, just easier projects. And then we kind of shifting, we had this, want to kind of share some knowledge with you folks tonight. From a mitigation standpoint, mitigation grant availability, I have 2 projects that we're going to be working on over the next 6 months where I received mitigation grants through Jefferson Parish and FEMA, where houses had repetitive floods. So what's that look like, Ricky? Well, it's a long process, and you got to stay with it. I'm to the finish line on 2 of these projects where it's been ongoing for 7, 8, 9 years, where I applied every year. But to get one of these grants to the finish line, it's a long process. I have 2 that we're going to be working on, and I have 4 right now that are pending funding, but it's a long process. So we'll talk about the first one is a house where had repetitive flood situation, and through a FEMA Jefferson Parish mitigation grant, they're going to pay me, actually they're going to pay a shoring company to elevate this house 3 feet up, do water retention through pavers, basically controlling the erosion control, but it's 100% funded through this grant. So to the tune of about $150,000 that I have to come up with $0. So that's pretty significant. The only requirement that you have with a mitigation grant, once you get a mitigation grant, is that you have to carry flood insurance. Well, both of these properties are in flood zones where I carry flood insurance anyway. So you can go to Jefferson Parish's website. They got a flood program at the Yenny building, and once a year around July, they get funds to award mitigation grants, and you can apply. And like I said, I've applied, over the course of these ones that were successful like 4 times, and then finally, once they took stride, I don't have to keep applying every year because it's in process, but they send engineering firms out to do site visits to the property, measure the elevation, and do various tasks, and that's what takes some time. But I have that project will be starting between now and the end of the year. It's been awarded. I've already signed the award. It's going through final engineering, and that house is going to be raised. And the end game, it's a rental property that I plan to hold, and my flood insurance, once it's raised 3.5 feet up from where it is today, will go down most by 50, 60%. The second one I talked about me getting ready to build a house. I have a house in Metairie, same situation. With these mitigation grants, you could do two things. The federal government will pay 100% to elevate the house, and then you can, so that's one thing you can do once you're awarded. The second thing you can do is you can say, I want to rebuild the house. So the second project I have, I'm actually going to be tearing a house down, same situation, repetitive flood. I elected not to raise the house. We're going to be tearing it down. I actually getting the power and the service is turned off next month, and it's going to be demoed. And with that program, they'll pay up to $150,000 to build the house. So there's a cost share. You can only build 10% bigger than what the existing structure is, but they'll pay up to $150,000. And they also pay part of the demo. So this particular project, they're gonna, at the end of the game, I gotta come up with $112,000. FEMA's coming up with $164 to demo the house and build a new house. My plans are to either most probably going to sell the house. The only requirement is I have to carry flood insurance, and whoever purchases it has to carry flood insurance. But I'll share that story as it progresses, and that build, it's about to take shape over the next few months. I'll be sharing that on the Westbank site.
Yeah, well, since you mentioned that, so when you're about to buy your next property, what's kind of the checklist that the property needs to fit to know that once I close on it, I'm gonna apply this JP mitigation grant? So if you underwriting a property, what's some of the criteria that the property needs to meet to know that you can apply that once you close on it?
That's a great question, because we talked about the 10 houses I purchased early on in my investment career. That's the houses that I applied for these mitigation grants with. It's the houses that I have the most equity in from a standpoint of they either paid off or have very minimal balances on them. Because if you demo a house, it's either got to be paid for or you got to pay it off to demo it. But from a checklist standpoint, with the dime that I went through this process with and applied over multiple years, the key is the first thing they look at is basically you go into a pool. Jefferson Parish is awarded, X amount of money, and from a risk standpoint, whoever has the highest flood payouts or repetitive losses, that's who gets seniority, if you will, on getting these awards. So the two properties I'm speaking of had, from Katrina, over the past 15 years had minimum 3 flood events. So that's the main thing with these mitigation grants. It's flood related. So you're raising a house, and the parish, FEMA's, the way they look at it is they're trying to mitigate risk. They'd rather give somebody a $150,000 grant and know that by building a new house, 3 or 4 feet from where the existing house is, or raising a house, they mitigating future risk. So that's the whole premise behind the program, is they want to mitigate future risk, and it's definitely something to look at. But from a purchase standpoint, you can do this research or have your insurance agent research how many times the house flooded over the last 10, 15 years.
You mentioned insurance, so I think that's a good segue. What's been, because you stay ahead of the game as much as possible on insurance, what's some of the tricks or hacks that you've uncovered from that November meetup all the way until now? Because I think insurance has probably been the biggest game changer. Yeah, so what have you discovered that's helpful?
No, between interest rates and insurance costs, that's the first 2 things I look at. And from an insurance mitigation, some of the things I'm doing to offset, multis. I'm interested in buying additional multis, but first thing you do if you're looking at a multi is get the insurance quote, and that basically eliminates a lot of opportunity from the standpoint of the multi-insurances. There's only 2 or 3 brokers writing on multis, and the rates are just sky high. So that's the first thing I look at from a multi standpoint. And what I've done, I'm fortunate that I've been investing long enough. I have several properties that are paid for free and clear, and I'm self-insuring. Some properties, if you own a property, one of the things that I've done too is if you own a property, I'll carry fire only. So you can get $150,000 fire policy on a property that you have paid for about $500-600 a year. And that's what I'm doing. So any of the properties that I'm self-insuring, some I'm not carrying flood on, that are in, minimal risk standpoint, from a minimal risk standpoint, I'm not carrying flood insurance on them, but I have several single-family homes that I'm offsetting this insurance crisis by self-insuring.
Got it. And which brokers are writing on multis that you're seeing right now? See, only 2.
Yeah, I mean, I use an independent agent, and both of my multis are through the insurance is with Accord, I believe, but there's a couple. Lloyd's of London starting to write again. They'll write on multis, but fortunately this year my renewals on my 2 multis didn't go up, so that was a blessing.
As far as your premiums, you found a way to kind of beat those down a little bit. So if it's self-insured, I think you found a cheap way with fire only. Are there some deductibles or some additions that you take away or add or reduce to try to beat the premium down on your purchases to help with cash flow?
Yeah, yes, exactly. On a flood, I'll carry maybe 5,000 contents, because most of your tenants, they have to carry renter's insurance to cover their tenants. So on flood, I'm just do a minimum of, say, 5,000. On hazard insurance, I'm using surplus lines. I found a company online called Obi. They writing still, and I've got several policies with them over the past 2 years. Obviously, Louisiana citizens, but I shop insurance, and from a deductible standpoint, I might go $10,000, $20,000 deductible, 5%, just to reduce the cost.
Yeah, and with Francine just passing, what's kind of your thought process with being self-insured when storms head your way? Are you adding extra boards, or what are you doing for the people when we do get self-insured with paid-off properties? How are you mitigating risk on the self-insured ones?
Say a lot of prayers. Yeah. The properties that have self-insured have solid roofs on them. From a wind standpoint, I'm a big believer in having a solid roof on a property. So all the properties I have self-insured, the roofs might be 1 or 2 years old, 3 years old. So that mitigates risk there. From a flood standpoint, I was driving around this morning checking on my properties, and unfortunately I had a few that took on minimal water, but most of my tenants worked and did some things to mitigate some of the problems we have. But I'm a big proponent of, I've put vinyl plank in some of my houses over the past 2 years, but the 5 houses that I had that took on a little water with Francine all had ceramic tile, and that water comes in and goes out. And I'm a big proponent of ceramic tile in my buy and hold property, so that helps. But it's a risk that I take with self-insuring some of my stuff. But cash flow's critical, and it's allowed me to have some nice cash flows where I am self-insuring, and basically I'm building reserves in event that I do have a situation with a self-insured property. I got reserves to take care of it.
Yep. So on the policy side, those high deductibles, taking off some of the add-ons, that can kind of beat down the premium. What about on the construction side? So like right now, people are going with the fortified roofs that'll kind of get down your policy a little bit. Is there anything your agent might have shared with you that you can do on the construction side to beat that premium down even further?
I mean, a big thing, the fortified is definitely an opportunity, especially with Louisiana citizens policies. You know, windows, you know, I had some properties that took on a little water just through wind-driven rain. But fortified is really the only thing that's really been brought to light in that regard.
Yep. So now, fast forward from the first property in the 90s, here we are now. So what advice do you tell the guy that bought that first house for $25,000? What do you tell him to do differently?
To do differently, I mean, the key is, and I've been successful in buying right. Don't overpay on the front end, and do your due diligence on what the rehab's going to cost you. You know, get quotes. You know, the big things on a house, when I look at a property for sale, I look at roof, HVAC, bathrooms, any multis. I run cameras down the sewer lines, you know, the big ticket items. But, you know, the first thing you need to look at is the big ticket items, you know, the kitchens, the bathrooms, you know, the big ticket items as it costs, you know, as it relates to rehabs.
Yep. And so what does the future look like for the portfolio? Are we hunkering down on operations? Or are we looking to grow a scale? And how could the group help?
Yeah, I mean, my 22-year-old son, he's actually buying a fourplex in a couple of weeks, so his first acquisition in Kenner. So I'm going to help him with that rehab project. We found a great deal on a fourplex, actually on a MLS in Chateau Estates. This fourplex has been vacant since Ida, and so we purchased that in the next couple of weeks. But I'm going to do a little diversification from the standpoint. I got a couple of commercial lots that I'm looking at potentially doing some mini storage on. But, you know, as it relates to a new investor, I mean, these meetups are instrumental. I wouldn't have 44 doors today. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have 44 doors today if I didn't network and come to some of these meetups. So these meetups are a big motivator for me, and just talking to people. So I would encourage the new investors to branch out, meet as many people as you can, and let people know what you're doing. You know, my brother, I was at his house this morning dragging out a couple of rugs. He took on a little water. And I knew next door to my brother's house, they got a landlord that came to check on his property. I went and had a conversation with him and gave him a card and said, hey, if you're ever interested in selling some of your properties, let me know. And he said, it's funny you asked. He said, I've been selling 1 or 2 a year, and I got several that I'm getting ready to sell. He said, actually, I'm going to sell this one next door, but I want $250 for it. I said, no, I'm not interested in that one. But I said, and then his wife was with him. She said, get his card, because we got some that need work. So, I mean, that's the key, is just letting people know what you do, and, you know, taking that step forward and you got to take risks. Anytime you buy an investment property, you take risks, but try to mitigate those risks by doing your homework and doing due diligence and talking to people. You know, I'm not a guru, but I'll share my knowledge with anybody, and I can give you my phone number. It's 504-628-8486. If you got questions, you're looking at a property, reach out, ask the questions. I'll share what I know and give you some advice.
Yep, and we're about to take questions from the audience, but one more. So now, what's your buy box? So you know what insurances are right now. They probably won't change this year. We know what insurance rates are. So now when you're looking at a property, what does your mental checklist look like?
I mean, I still try to buy right from the standpoint, but my buy box is on a single family house, anything under 200. You know, primarily I like under 100 that needs work. And, You know, most of the 7 houses I bought last year, I would say every one of them were under 100,000. But those properties today, the 5 that I've already redone, and the 2 that I'm finishing, actually the 2,600 square foot one I paid 140 for, but owner financed. So minimal note, 5% interest. So I benefited from that standpoint, negotiating a good interest rate. But just buying right is the key, and don't overpay on the front end, and know what it's going to take to rehab the property. You know.
Got it. Questions?
What about your buy box for your multifamilies? Are you still trying to get them where you can do some work, gain equity at the beginning, or are you trying to get something that's like already established, already done?
The key on the multis is the numbers. You know, first thing, insurance. You know, just like this fourplex we buying, the first thing we did was got a quote on the insurance, and insurance on this fourplex that my son's purchasing is going to be right at $10,000 a year. So the insurance, the numbers have to work. So, you know, if the rents are depressed, that's a bonus. You know, if it's somebody that's owned the property for a long time and the rents, you know what the market rents are, and you know what you get the rent roll, and you can look at the rent roll and establish that you can, with a little rehab, raise the rents to market rates, and just doing due diligence on the numbers. But on the multis, I've tried to buy several multis this year, but the numbers just don't work due to the insurance, and that's unfortunate. And until, some of these other brokers start writing, that's not going to change.
Next question. Besides insurance, what else? So insurance, compressed rents on the multis, what else are you looking for? Or what's the reason why the numbers haven't worked out? So insurance doesn't work, the rents are not what they need to be. What else is your checklist on multis?
It's just on the multis, the biggest factor is insurance and just the price of the property. But one thing I've learned, just like my 12-plex, is don't be scared to make an offer. You know, I got that 12-plex under contract for $800. The rents were depressed, and I ended up buying it for $600. So, and that was the first multi that I purchased. So don't be scared to make offers. And look at that MLS. I got the Realtor app on my phone, and I have areas that I want to purchase property, and I get notifications every day to see what's going on in the marketplace and see what things are listing for. This fourplex my son's buying, it was on the MLS. Been on the MLS for 6 months, and we negotiated a deal. It's a short sale, and we're buying this thing for 50 cents on a dollar. But we got to do some sweat. Needs a new roof, needs siding. We're fortunate the interior of these units are in good shape. We're going to be able to get this fourplex up and rented in 60 days. So basically renovated in 60 days with, multiple crews working at the same time. But, one thing I've learned is don't be scared to make offers, because you'll surprise yourself.
Yep.
And something else, don't be scared to be second position. The 12-plex that I acquired was under contract. I told my agent I want to put in a backup offer. The first offer that didn't get financing, didn't go through, we got the property. This fourplex my son's buying, same thing. It was under contract. I said, we still want to put a backup offer in. We put a backup offer in. 2 weeks later, we get a phone call. They couldn't get financing on a property. So that's something I always do. I put in backup offers all the time if I desire the property.
Yeah. And last question.
So you bought your first property from your friend you knew, and then the next 9 you bought, like in the 90s, did you buy them from the MLS, or how did you buy those ones?
Yeah, the first 9, some of them on MLS, and some of them agents contacted me, before the properties hit the market. it's basically how I acquired them. And basically, you know, I leveraged that first property to buy my second property and took the equity out of each house to keep scaling up. And that's how I got to 10, you know. And I actually purchased one house, believe it or not, for $32,000 on credit cards back in my day, you know. So, and then once I fixed up the property, got a loan, paid off the credit cards. I used 5 or 6 credit cards to buy the house. And it was a house on Darlene Street in Metairie. I sold that house, and I'm a buy and hold guy, and every house that I've ever sold, I wish I wouldn't have sold it. You know, I drive by them houses and say, man, why did I sell that house, you know? And even this house I talking to you about that I bought with credit cards, I ended up selling it for like $80,000, and I kicked myself today saying I should have held on to it. But for the most part, I buy and hold, and I'm always looking, so hope to buy one from you, Steve, soon. And you know, that we're going to make it happen. And you know, as far as next year, interest rates starting to come down a little bit. I'm getting my finances straight, and I'm going to refi a couple of these houses we finishing up, pay down my credit line, and I'm going to be back in buy mode. But one thing I'm definitely going to do is try to limit myself to 1 or 2 major rehabs a year, because that kind of slowed me down this year.
Yep. And these next, any more questions? Elvis?
Yeah, I didn't buy anything with the intent of getting a mitigation grant. These are just rentals that I've held over the years that had repetitive floods. So I've never bought something with an intent of getting a mitigation grant. But the 2 properties I talked about tonight are properties that I bought early on in my investment. I've owned them for 20 plus years, and you know the history. I lived the history, but the mitigation program is real. It's real money, and you know, I'm fortunate that I've worked the process over the last 7 or 9 years, and the reward is I'm about to get $300,000 through 2 grants to invest in my portfolio. So this house I'm going to raise, I'm going to hold it. The house that I am going to demo and build, I'm going to do a 1031. My plan is to build that house. We're going to start in December. By March, it should be finished. And I'm going to put it on the market, sell it. And my goal is to take that 1031 into a multi-unit property.
Yep.
Enjoy hearing you speak. A question about vetting your contractors that you were talking about earlier. Do you require your guys to hold their own workers' comp or general liability insurance? The reason I'm asking is I thought I handed that myself for my LLC years ago. Currently just have general liability insurance. I'm professional handicap license, but like if I were to try to work with you on some projects, what type of insurance do you require to say hold?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, on any of these mitigation projects, you got to have a GC with, like, I can't, this house that I'm going to build, Robert Wolf Construction is going to do the build. I couldn't build it myself. So you have to use basically a GC that's licensed, bonded, and insured. Me personally, I have, you know, if I'm doing a rehab, I carry insurance on that rehab project and until it's finished. And then I have, you know, all my electricians, plumbers, they have to be insured. Yeah, I've thought about them. You know, as far as future state, I'm dabbling with the possibility of getting my real estate license, a contractor's license, and that's kind of some things I'm looking at.
All right. So for anybody else that's looking to scale up their portfolio, There's the MLS. There's our sponsor, Homebuyer Louisiana. We got John in the back. You can give them a call, 504-323-4090, because you buy from wholesalers also, right?
Yes, I've actually bought several properties from wholesalers that I've met at these meetups, so definitely an avenue. Some of the great deals that I got last year were through wholesalers.
Awesome. And if you do not have a 22-year-old son that can do the leasing for you, you can call us at Lease Management, 504-606-1304. Any other questions from the audience? Well, we appreciate the time. I know people are going to stop you and ask you more questions. I don't know if Gattuso's is even open. Okay, all right, so we
Yeah,
still...
and if anybody's got questions on the mitigation process, I'm very schooled on that because I've worked it, and be glad to share my knowledge and give you contacts with Jefferson Parish that can help you navigate that process.
Yep. Well, thank you for your time, Ricky. Clap 'em up.